All right, so looking at the attendee list, I think everybody here is familiar with who I am. One of the owners at Pearl Solutions Group. You're probably also very familiar with who Pearl Solutions Group is. But what you may not be familiar with is one of our latest partners is ThreatLocker. And ThreatLocker was kind enough to join me in this discussion today around a really interesting buzzword that's out today called zero trust. We'll dig into that in just a little bit. Jerome, did you want to give some quick background of yourself and who ThreatLocker is real quick while we kind of open things up?
Absolutely, sure. ThreatLocker is essentially a true zero trust type of solution. I'm actually a sales engineer with the ThreatLocker team here, and hopefully during this time, I'll be able to show you a number of abilities around ThreatLocker that you can essentially leverage to ensure that you have a more secure and a less surface area of attack inside of your existing IT environment.
That's perfect. Yeah, no, and that's exactly what it's about, right? I think the if kind of has moved away from my my talk track lately, and it's more of almost a when, unfortunately. But what can we do as part of our just general day-to-day to help us protect what's going on? So like I mentioned before, you all are familiar with Pearl. We've been around for since the mid 90s. Greg Smith and I got involved back in 2014 from the previous owner. I've really been working to create an environment where we provide the resources to small, mid-sized businesses to have an actual IT staff that they can rely on. We built an amazing team of technicians that really have a passion for technology and supporting end users, but also keeping their eye on what's emerging from a technology perspective. So our goal is to really try to get that out to you. So for everything from obviously fixing, hey, my email's not working, my printer's not turning on, to, hey, we're trying to migrate into a full cloud environment or move from a legacy email system or just get onto some new servers. That's what we do. That's bread and butter. I sometimes refer to us as plumbers. And we're the plumbers. We keep that water flowing, and if something gets clogged up, we come in and we do our best to get rid of that clog, or we replace some pipes that aren't working right, things like that. So very foundational what we do. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is that it's really our responsibility as that IT provider, that technology provider for our clients, to have an awareness of what's going on from a cybersecurity perspective. We're no longer in a situation where you've just got your computer and you're in an isolated environment, and it's just important that computer keeps running, because everybody is interconnected nowadays, right? It's all part of how we do every day of life. So as we dug more into that cybersecurity piece of our business, we came across a lot of options for products that would help make our clients have a better level of protection against what's going on out there. So here's some great statistics around why we need to make sure that things are being protected. And it's kind of interesting. I just got another email again this morning from Microsoft around, hey, there's somebody trying to get access to your email. I'm like, yeah, I don't even know why. Yes, we know. It's been like that for a long time, right? That ransomware attacks are happening every 11 seconds, right? And then, and I love this one, 1 in every 99 emails is a phishing attack. So we all get a ton of information coming at us every single day through emails. It's crazy to think that yes, while maybe close to 50% of our emails are spam, I think somebody said, another stat I had was that there's 15 billion spam emails that go out every single day. Some people think that it's around half of the emails we get are spam. Some people are like, it's like 75% are spam. But it's not hard to imagine that 1 out of every 99 emails that we get is an actual attack. It's somebody not just trying to get us to click through something and buy something we don't need, but rather somebody that's literally trying to compromise the credentials that we have, that we use to do our job and essentially to function as part of our day. So, ransomware is a really scary thing. And if you haven't been directly impacted by it, you're probably you probably need to think about that a little bit more. Apple, their supplier, got hit with a $50 million ransomware attack. The pipeline that happened, what was that, like? I think it was $70 million or $40 million, something like that. I forget how millions, but it's always in the millions now. It's never, hey, I need 30 grand or I need 40 grand, something like that. These guys have gotten really bold and they've gotten really expensive to address the problems that are going on. So the meat processing plant, there's one that affect everybody, right? Like, oh my gosh, I need my meat for Memorial Day. Well, you can't have it because the plant got shut down from ransomware. So it's unfortunate. But it's everywhere. It's constantly coming at us. And the reality is that our businesses depend on emails to function. They're a primary form of how we interact with not just each other within the organization, with our banks, with our suppliers, with our vendors, with our customers. Email is a big piece of it. I know that I try to make sure we're communicating with our clients via email. So Cindy's on the call with us today, and she's done an amazing job with taking some of the ideas we have around. Oh, here's a really good really good topic that I'd like my clients to know about. And she says, great, I'll put that into some of the communication that we have going out this month. So for us, it's a great way to communicate. But the reality is that we're adding to that volume of emails that people are getting in. And you couple that with the amount of emails that people are getting, the fact that not everybody is working in an office environment anymore. So sometimes your focus might get split a little with some other things that are going on around if you're working from home or I'm working remotely. All these things can tend to distract us from what we may think we know, right? We like to think that the users are very much in tune with, okay, if an email's coming in, it seems malicious, and I know that some of you on the call today have sent emails to my team and said, hey, is this a spam email? Should I click the link? And I think maybe once we've come back and said, no, yeah, you should definitely click that link. No, it's always like, yeah, that's spam, good catch. Don't click through on it, right? But it's everywhere. It's very much part of what the users are required to know as part of how they do their job. So it's more than just putting things in place to help combat these threats that are coming in. It's also about creating a culture, right? So we're given these amazing tools on our desktop, and the culture has to be around security. It's all about, okay, when I'm running an application on my computer, really having the user understand, hey, there's a responsibility that I have here to understand that this email is malicious, or hey, I'm on a website and this pop-up happened. I need to not click through on that, right? So getting in front of this and educating your users and keeping that mindset around this concept of zero trust. And I know it's a crazy concept to say, you know what, we're gonna trust nothing. Don't trust anybody. And that's the new buzzword. And it shows up on insurance applications, and it shows up in different areas of our lives nowadays. But the concept of zero trust, it's not new, right? Everybody has been doing something we like to call zero trust since the late 90s. So for those of you that are old school, who remembers like putting, plugging the modem in to your computer and dialing into, a board or something like that, a message board, or I can remember as a kid, like I think my dad had some of that communication between his home office and his office so that he could access documents or something like that. And this is back when the floppy disks were, a foot and a half wide. But that security evolution started back in 1989 with someone saying, hey, you know what? I don't trust everybody that's on the other side of this phone cord. Let's go ahead and put something in between me and them. And we're going to call that a firewall. And that firewall essentially stands up and says, you know what? We're going to close everything, and we're only going to allow these three things to come in. So zero trust started with this idea of a firewall that is literally part of everybody's world right now. If you don't think you have a firewall in place, you do, right? Firewalls have come so far from being, hey, this is just a big device that sits between the internet and your network. We have firewalls that live on our local computers that are actually protecting our local computers from the network itself. And a lot of times those are turned on, and those are allowing certain ports through. And what's crazy is that it's still kind of doesn't protect us 100%, right? So we keep putting these layers in place, and we still have the potential of having some sort of what we call a Jerome, you said it earlier, it was a threat landscape, or not a attack vector. What's the word I'm looking for? It's
Surface area of attack.
surface. Thank you. The surface area, the surface area of your attack, it gets minimized, but it's still there because I've got a user that's sitting at the other side of that computer doing work and trying to get their day-to-day job done. You know, they're not necessarily out there to do something that's malicious, but the reality is they're sitting there, they're using the tools. And so as we create new and better tools for people to do their job, then we're creating new and better firewalls and systems to manage how those users are doing their jobs. And we come up with this concept of managing the access that they have, right? So we refer to it as privileged access management. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later on in today's meeting. But you know, the idea is that by default, we want to limit and we want to deny things that are actually occurring inside of that environment. So I love this statement here. This is, and I don't even know who said it. I'm sure I stole it from somebody, but it says trust is never granted implicitly, but must be continually evaluated. And if you really think about it, that is absolutely how trust works in our lives across the board, right? We don't start off meeting a stranger on the road and being like, hey, you know, come on into my house. I just met you. You got this really nice trench coat and rubber gloves. You should definitely come hang out in my living room, right? No, we wouldn't do that, right? Like, this person's got to earn my trust. So I start off in my normal life with zero trust. Why would we not take the same type of approach from the technology and the enterprise assets that we have running our day-to-day business, you know? So if you think about everyone being potentially somebody that is able to inflict pain on you on some level, right? I don't think Bob in accounting is actually a malicious person. Well, I don't know Bob. Bob might be malicious. I have no idea. But let's say Bob is by nature not a malicious person, but Bob is doing his job, and Bob is getting bombarded with those emails, and 1 out of the 99 pops in and he accidentally clicks it, and then that person gets access to his account, and from that access they're then able to monitor and understand how things work inside of your organization just because they have access to your email. And from there they craft their own attack, make it look like it's coming from Bob and it's targeted at you, and you change account information of a payment. I've actually had that happen to 1 or 2 of my clients where the email box gets compromised from somebody else, and a malicious threat actor will come in and craft based upon the observations that they made of that person's inbox. It's pretty powerful stuff. And you're thinking, how does somebody have time to do all this stuff? Well, the reality is that's all they do, right? These threat actors, your role is, as Bob in accounting, is to go through and make sure that you're processing invoices and collecting payments and paying vendors and creating reports for your boss. Their whole job is just sitting there trying to figure out how they compromise your environment and take what you're working at. So it's a pretty powerful thing. And again, back to that security culture, making sure you're thinking through, okay, well, what does this look like as a culture? And if I can take a step back and say, you know, there's a potential that everybody in my environment is obviously getting bombarded with the same things I am, make sure we're not ignoring the fact that they may be in a situation where they're compromised.
Can I add to that, Floyd, real quick?
Absolutely.
So one thing that I wanted to add with everybody being suspect is this. The truth of the matter is, right, even the software providers that provide us the applications that we use on a day-to-day basis, they're also essentially targets by these malicious actors, right? One such example that I can give you is essentially in, if you guys heard of the application for Kaseya, right? A threat actor was essentially able to go and inject a malicious piece of software inside of that application. And once they had it inside of that application, that of course that the vendor pushed out that application to all of its end users as a form of an update. And then of course now the actual vendor itself was disseminating this essentially malicious software across the environment. So the truth be told is these threat actors nowadays are becoming absolutely very sophisticated in the way that they're able to inject applications that are meant to cause harm to your environment or really harvest data from your environment as well. So having an additional tool built inside of your endpoints that can detect, so to speak, things that are essentially suspect, right? Everyone is a suspect, and be able to analyze each individual file is certainly key to creating that true zero trust that Floyd is talking about.
Yeah, I mean, Kaseya is a great example, but it goes back really far. Like, look at, I mean, I'll think back to Adobe Flash, right?
Mm-hmm.
They pulled Adobe Flash is no longer even available because Adobe Flash was allowing privileged access to things that are core on your computer, and threat actors woke up one day and said, well, people love going to the internet, and I can
Right.
create something they're going to click on, and I can inject myself into their environment. And that's a pretty scary thing if you think about it. This one should be no surprise to anybody, right? So we talk about what we can do to protect our environments. And I don't think anybody's going to stand up and say, oh, I don't need any antivirus. That's not something I need on my computer. No one's going to say that. But you got to realize that antivirus is a reactionary product. It's defense. It only knows about what it's been told about. It's got definitions that it runs off of. It's looking for something to execute that it knows about, and the ability to say, whoa, that's malicious because I was told about that already. And so then it blocks it, which is great. But unfortunately, that doesn't cover the things that it doesn't know to be malicious. Great example that Jerome just gave is Kaseya pushed an application out. Well, as far as the antivirus knew, is that application was allowed to be on that computer, so it didn't think anything of the executable that was inside of there. And what is potentially happening is that these threat actors are gaining credentials to your local machine in the form of an admin account. So we all know that, as we're executing applications, you do need to have more access to the system. If you're installing something or you're running an update, or even executing some poorly written programs, actually, if they're custom built, sometimes will not have limitations on the requirement for local admin access. I've seen applications like this in some of my clients, and it's very industry specific type applications. But unfortunately, the application's like, well, we couldn't figure out how to make this run well, so we're going to need you to elevate our privileges just so we can run properly and access stuff and do our job. Which, okay, it's a known application. Well, what if a threat actor gets access to that? Now they've got admin access to your local machine. What's the potential that now they have the ability to access things within the rest of your network environment as well, or get into your email? They're, whatever you're seeing on your computer, they're potentially seeing on their side too. So if you really think through that threat landscape, it's crazy huge, and we've got a huge target on every single one of us, because we don't spend every day of our lives trying to figure out how to break through this stuff. We're just trying to take advantage of the tools that we've been given and the technology that makes it better for us to run through our day. So, Jerome, any other comments on the admin account?
Absolutely, yeah. So from an admin account perspective, right, it's always best practice to essentially provide end users with a user privilege on their machine. But the unfortunate side of it is that there are a number of individuals and almost all organizations, right, that have some type of development capability. And it really only takes that one machine in the environment to essentially have that capability to get access into certain things. And once that machine is infiltrated, you run the risk of essentially that individual pushing out unintentionally some type of worm through some type of application that is already being allowed on their specific device. And additionally, the key really around having a security tool is something that keeps account of things that are running that are uncommon, right? Or something that are not necessarily something that is seen as an item that typically gets executed in a normal environment, like an individual that's running Word or Excel or a PowerPoint. They're typically not opening up tools like PowerShell with those with those types of applications. So in any situation, if you give the individual access to Word or PowerPoint or Excel, they could, in theory, access any application that is already allowed on their machine. That, in my definition, is not a true form of zero trust. That is just allowing any application to run. A true zero trust is really all about preventing how applications can and can't interact with each other. And that's really the whole purpose around that term zero trust.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Totally agree. So here's a fun acronym, PAM, right? I wanted to make sure that this got talked about a little bit today because we're actually seeing this show up inside of cybersecurity, like liability insurance documents that we're helping our clients fill out. So insurance companies are getting smart, and I'll throw this one out here. If anybody hasn't heard the term CMMC, it's actually a DoD, government DoD acronym around levels of security. So they're 1 through 5. Just a little prophetic-ness right now. I think that ultimately the government is going to drive the CMMC levels down to businesses, and insurance companies are going to take advantage of it because right now we're getting insurance requests and they have to go through every single line item and find out, oh, hey, do you have multi-factor authentication turned on? Do you have privileged account or privileged access management software enabled? Do you have this encrypted? Do you have this, this restriction put in place? Are you doing next gen antivirus, that kind of thing? So there's this whole list of 2-page, 3 pages worth of questions that the insurance companies are having to go through now. And what'll happen is that this basically you have to become CMMC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 certified, and they'll just simply ask you, what level are you? And you'll say, oh, I'm level 2 or I'm level 3. And they'll say, okay, well, here's what your insurance rate's going to be, and here's what we'll protect. So I fully expect that to kind of happen. But the whole concept behind this privileged access management, it's not just all about the software. It's also about the actual users themselves, right? And Jerome said it perfectly, is that there is a certain amount of data and applications that every user needs access to do their job and do it well. And the technology is so powerful, and we want to make sure that everybody has the ability to do and get the most out of the machines and the systems that we've worked so hard to develop and make better over the years. But we want to limit it to just that. There's no reason for someone that's not in accounting to have access to QuickBooks. There's not any reason for somebody in accounting to have access to whatever application that we use from an HR perspective. There's that overlap there that isn't necessary, and that's the idea of limiting what privileges people have access to. That data that is part of our day-to-day work. There's no reason for someone in a different department to access it on a regular basis. And a lot of times when we're going in and we're setting things up, and I know I'm a little guilty of this in the past, it's you walk into maybe a small environment and somebody just says, well, hey, I need access to this too. And you say, okay, well, I'll just open up everything so that everybody in the environment, you're behind a firewall, it's fine, you're safe. We'll just put this application on here and we'll put these shares out there, and maybe everybody inside the organization has cross access to all the different information. And really the idea would be, instead of doing that, to come in with a mindset of, hey, we're going to go ahead and restrict the data that people have access to inside of our environment. If you're in an Active Directory environment, or think about it, even Office 365, I think most of the people on this call are in 365 today. Does your user have global admin privileges to 365? And do you also use that one for your day-to-day email? you probably shouldn't, because if your credentials get compromised, this is part of those billions of emails that you're going through every single year, then now that person has global access rights to your 365 and they can wreak some serious havoc. Whereas if you just have a separate account set up and here's my admin account, and the only time I use it is to log in and make changes to my users and licensing and things outside of 365. That way, if I were to get compromised, I no longer have exposure to someone getting access to my entire 365 environment. So that's the concept of least privilege. Being able to say, hey, this is what you have access to. This is what you need to be able to get done what your job description says you need to get done, but nothing else. And if we take that beyond the concept of just the data that somebody has access to, or the file shares, or the account in 365, or the account on the domain, and really look at, like Jerome said a minute ago, around the actual applications themselves, then we come up with this idea of application whitelisting. And so application whitelisting is really what Jerome's going to show us here in a minute through the product called ThreatLocker. I was exposed to it probably last year sometime, and I looked at it and I said, yeah, this is something we've got to get involved in. So I'm really, really excited to have partnered with them. But I got an opportunity to actually meet your CEO last week, Jerome, at a conference in Austin. And I had to tell you, this guy has got a passion for protecting the endpoints of all of his users, and they continue to add value and add additional pieces to the ThreatLocker puzzle. But at the core, what I really wanted everybody to think about is this idea of blocking applications that don't need to run inside of the environment, from the standpoint of, hey, this is Word, this is Excel, this is PowerPoint, and they probably all, they all need to be whitelisted inside of your, for all users in your application. But then over here, we've got this other, custom application that really only 6 people inside the organization need access to. Okay, well, we can actually lock that application down to just those people so that nobody else is running them and accessing them from wherever they happen to be inside the network. ThreatLocker even takes it one step further, and it actually looks at all the files within the application itself. So for example, if I'm whitelisting Outlook today, or that Kaseya application, or an Adobe application, I'm whitelisting it today. And in addition to just saying, yeah, I approve Adobe Acrobat, but then it goes down and says, here's all the files that make up this, and they're all signed and they're all approved. Those files, if anybody changes one of those files, that new file that helps run that program will not be whitelisted. So it's taking it to the level of saying, if somebody were to maliciously go in and insert a file that looks exactly like the original file, it wouldn't matter because it doesn't match what we said was allowed. And by doing that, you really put an end to any malicious actor's ability to come in and alter the programs on your computer and the files on your computer for some sort of actual malicious type of experience. So Jerome, you want to add anything to that? I know this is my favorite slide here.
Yeah, 100%. So what is key to understand about application whitelisting is that it has been, Floyd had alluded to it, that application whitelisting has been around for a very, very long time. And a lot of enterprises actually have entire teams that are surrounding this application whitelisting concept. It is a massive undertaking for somebody to actually implement this on their own. And what typically happens is you have an entire team looking at every single file, cataloging actually the specific signature of every single file, and creating policies that says, okay, this file is allowed to run because it matches a signature. But the biggest problem, though, and the biggest challenge that most organizations have with this is not everybody has a massive team that can do all of that work. And every Tuesday, for instance, Patch Tuesday comes out. It's a very common thing in the IT world. They release a bunch of patches. Now, all of a sudden, things that you had whitelisted yesterday, is no longer working today because somebody, a manufacturer, a software provider, had wrote over that specific application, and now it no longer works. So to keep it up to date is really the biggest challenge around application whitelisting. Certainly, ThreatLocker has already created a system around making this concept much easier to essentially manage and having it available for organizations that don't have teams dedicated to doing or executing an application whitelisting approach.
Yep. Thank you. And that's really truly what I've been impressed with is the ease of implementing this solution. Because we've looked at several different products to add in there. I mean, I know I've had this webinar series going for about a year now, where we pick different products and different solutions throughout the months, and we went from MDR products, and we talked about next gen AV, and we talked about dark web, and we talk about security training, things like that. And these are all super important. And unfortunately, there's not a silver bullet, is what I tell folks. I'm like, there's not a silver bullet. There's not any one product that's going to solve the entirety of your threat landscape. But we want to take an opportunity, individually within the different organizations, to say, okay, let's take a look at what your exposure is and what you're dealing with on a day-to-day, what's your user base look like, and make a determination around, okay, do we need to go ahead and put in some sort of SIM or EDR solution in here? But I will say there's very few organizations that I could look at and say, you know what you don't need. You don't need some sort of zero trust application whitelisting, because frankly, I think we can all benefit from this type of protection, this ability to say, hey, there's a layer being put in here that essentially is change management, if you will. It's saying, hey, if something alters from the way it was yesterday, we're going to stop it. The cool part is the reason we do this. And let's see if did I click too many times? No, there it goes. So this concept of fileless malware, and it's kind of what is that? Well, so we all know what malware is, right? It's an application that's running on our computer that's doing something malicious. This idea of fileless malware, where these threat actors go and they compromise those applications, like Jerome was talking about, and they then modify the rest of your system because they now have access to it. So let's say, and I'm going to take Word, and I don't know that Word's ever been compromised or a DLL's been out of place there, but you execute this, and on the front, everything looks like it's running normally, and then in the background, somebody's going and taking advantage of PowerShell or some other scripting tool that lives inside of Windows by default. But by the simple act of them having access to a certain part of Word, they're able to go do this in the background, and they go and communicate out to their servers, and they start either pushing data out, or they end up with lateral spread within your environment. But being able to stop certain applications from interacting with these tool sets on your computer are certainly important. The concept of macros has been around since forever. I can remember macros back in the very first days of Excel. And in fact, they sold macro keyboards where I could hit one key and it would do 6 different key functions at one time. Well, Microsoft's built in this ability to have macros inside of their software. Well, I just got an email, I think last week or something, where they're disabling macros by default now. They're like, they finally realized, oh, maybe we should probably stop letting people do that by default. You have to go and turn that on now. But it's not the only thing on your computer that can execute stuff in the background. So we've been talking a lot about all the different concepts, zero trust, all the pieces of the puzzle that make sense to us. I did want to give Jerome an opportunity to show you kind of what the user experience is like and what that looks like from an action type of scenario. So I'm actually going to unshare my screen, and then Jerome's going to take over here and give us a little taste of what he's got going on. So Jerome, if you're ready.
Yep, that sounds good.
Do that.
I will do that right now. Thank you so much, Floyd. Appreciate it. So essentially, right, we have this slide here that talks about really what zero trust is in action, right? There's, essentially to have a true zero trust type of solution, you kind of within the threat locker world, you have to go through a number of different steps. Floyd and I essentially would spend a large portion of our time if you were to get with the zero trust application that we have with threat locker, doing what's called a learning mode. And inside of the learning mode, the whole concept around it is really understanding all of the different applications that you're running today. So we're not just going to turn this on, essentially start blocking every single thing that you're running and learn it from the back end. Instead, we'll put the agents down on the machines, learn every single application that you're running in your environment, delete any type of unwanted applications. For example, if you said, hey, those people, the individuals maybe at the reception desk, they don't need to have iTunes running on their machine. We'll create policies around those that says, okay, specifically those endpoints aren't allowed to use that. And of course, moving forward, we would then secure the endpoints at that point. And in a security endpoint type of situation, everything that we have not cataloged as part of the environment, whether it's a new application or more importantly, if it was malware, it would not be allowed to run. So let's look at the example, let's say from this perspective of if an application essentially were to try to get installed on the application, whether by way of some type of malicious piece of software or either somebody just trying to download something. Again, there's a lot of different download locations out there that you can pull applications, right? And in those situations, you don't really know what the quality of that executable is. So in this case, right, I pulled down this application. If I were to try to execute it, what would end up happening is threat locker itself, once it's secured, would block this end user from being able to execute this application. Now, think of it from a malware perspective. If they try to execute it, we're now able to block it from running. And of course, if it's a legitimate piece of software that an end user wants to run, they could request access for it, send it in over to Floyd. Floyd will take a look at it, really examine that executable, make sure it's 100% legitimate, it's 100% being sent by the actual manufacturer that's providing it. And of course, he'll send you some type of response letting you know, okay, go ahead, we're going to allow you to go ahead and install that application. Now, from the perspective of really securing the environment, right, we're talking about blocking any execution of anything that's unknown. We're able to request access for it, and we can control also the application interaction. So from that perspective, right, what ThreatLocker really shines on in terms of being able to control applications is this concept of ring fencing, is that's that ability to essentially control how applications can and can't interact with each other. Let me show you a very common example. And this is one of those things and kind of a little bit of a tip for you moving forward. What a lot of malware folks are trying to do nowadays is they're creating what are called ducky scripts. They're putting them on USB drives. They're dropping them inside of parking lots. And inside of this, and I think Floyd alluded this to earlier, right? You have a Word document. There's no issue with Word itself, right? There's no
Right.
maliciousness in Word itself. But the problem is they're embedding things inside of the actual Word document. So when you go to plug in that USB drive, you're taking a look at an application. In this case, if you follow this link, it goes to Google. But in this case, it actually would open up a PowerShell link, and we can put a number of commands around it. What ThreatLocker can do for you is really essentially inside of Word, we tried to launch this path. Notice that Word was blocked from actually launching this application. That is one, again, a good way to minimize, limit that surface area of attack. Some of the things around that it's stopping, PowerShell, command prompt, C script, scheduled tasks. There's a whole multitude of different applications that attackers use to compromise your environment. And we're certainly able to block those types of attacks inside of ThreatLocker.
Right, because most applications have a known set of other tools inside. I mean, because Windows provides a tool set for your application to use. So there's clearly going to be certain things that your application needs access to just to run, right? But the idea is that by default, Windows doesn't necessarily block a manufacturer from accessing other things inside of your Windows environment. But if you take something like a threat locker and you create this, what's called ring fence, in other words, you're essentially putting this fence around that application and say, hey, these are the known things that it should be accessing. If it tries to go outside of that fence, we're not going to let it. We're gonna keep it within its within its area.
Yep. And the other thing that I wanted to point out, right? This is going to Google, but of course we could have this link going out to, let's say, a malicious website. And from a malicious website perspective, a lot of times actually the malicious code nowadays is not something that they're embedding essentially on a piece of software that you download or whatever. What they're embedding actually now are files that essentially have commands inside of it that are legitimate in general. Right, they're being able to call out to a specific application is very common, particularly in using, like, let's say, a PowerShell, for example. It's not wrong for it to go out to the internet. So then therefore an antivirus from that perspective will not see that something is actually happening that's wrong. But the problem then comes into play is when PowerShell then is able to call home to some type of server, pull down that malicious code, and then execute that malicious code at that point. So it's a really big deal, the ability to really control how applications can go out, let's say, to an internet location, especially if it's something that you don't trust. And of course, your thought process is, well, I also access a number of servers also remotely, right? Inside of ThreatLocker, we can create policies around those custom locations and make exceptions. Why allow individuals to get at, countless millions of different websites when all you really access are maybe a handful of websites that are legitimate? So we'll limit it to those specific sites, and then you are essentially minimizing that surface layer of attack yet once again.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
The only thing I would add to that too is that what's really great is that that learning mode piece. I was very impressed with that because it's essentially saying, hey, we're going to set aside a period of time. And yes, during that period of time, we're going to be watching what's going on. And then afterwards, you have a full list of here's what your people are doing for the last 2 weeks. What in this list should not be allowed. And you can go through and pick out, well, we don't really want them on shopping, or hey, we don't really know why we're accessing, this toolkit for shop. There's all those shopping toolbars and other stuff that those are not great. Those should not be part of your corporate environment. And this helps us identify that and shut them down.
Okay. And the next section I wanted to talk about is this elevation control, which actually ties back to Floyd's discussion around privileged access management. Essentially a lot of, the biggest way that we can secure our environment is to provide end users with user privileged accounts. The ability, or the lack of ability, I should say, to install anything without any type of permission. And that is one good layer of protection. But the problem with that, right, it slows down business, it slows down production, it slows down anything that you want to do. Every time you want to install a specific application that you need to essentially use, you have to request for elevation. And then, of course, at that point, there's this whole back and forth of like, all right, let me remote into your machine. I'm in the middle of doing a spreadsheet right now. Why don't you call me back later? You're back and forth doing that. But with ThreatLocker, you can essentially leverage that capability a little bit differently. So let's say in this situation, right, we have this application. Let's say it's legitimate and user wants to run it. They have to run it as an administrator because they are a user privileged account, right? This is what you would typically see. And then that's where that back and forth, that mouse chase starts. Can you please allow me access to that? And of course, that whole game of like, let me get at it, provide you some type of privilege. And even the, from an end user perspective, it's like, I really need this right now. There's a lot of, I shouldn't say pushiness, but, it has to happen essentially to continue to run business. But in this case, we have the ability in ThreatLocker for you as an end user to be able to just send a request in. Right? Once you send the request in, it would hit our approval center. And then from here, you'll notice that it's coming in. We'll view it. And from a privilege standpoint, what Floyd would be able to do is essentially say, all right, I'm going to allow you the ability to install that. I'll permit it and allow you, the end user, to perform the installation yourself. I'll give you an hour to do it. And once I essentially allow this to run, from this perspective now, I'll create a couple of policies in my environment saying essentially that this particular end user could then now install this application, and then at that point, after that hour's time period, the privilege would go away. But of course, a policy now has been created so that this end user can then continue to use the product as a user privileged account. So maintaining that security level as well, and really creating that true zero trust. With the elevation with ring fencing, that's another great concept around it, right? The ability to hop around and essentially use elevated privileges does exist. It is a threat in our environment. So if I essentially ran this as an administrator, right, what would happen is as an administrator, you could essentially hop around and run certain things inside of the environment. And as an admin there, I could essentially launch maybe something malicious. So if somebody had gained control of your environment, they could then use this elevated privilege, run, let's say, a PowerShell, which is a lot more powerful in causing issues in the environment as an administrator, right? So these types of attacks are becoming more and more common. And having the ability to control that inside a threat locker, which is really just a couple of clicks to say, don't allow essentially, this particular application to hop to another application. Very easy to do inside a threat locker, just a couple of clicks, and we can have that essentially put in place to prevent those types of attacks. Anything to add to that, Floyd, before I go on to storage control?
No, I would even open it up to the attendees and see if they had any questions, because I know this is a lot of information. What I really like about it is my ability as an IT administrator. I don't even have to go in and start typing in my credentials as an admin on the user's machine to be able to allow them to run an update, or hey, I need to install this update on this application. Okay, no problem. I've given your user access to do that for the next hour, and you set a time limit. It's so great because that basically eliminates, again, like you said, the coordination, but then it's also one less, frankly, it's one less vulnerability that exists, because instead of me having somebody that's got to look up a password on my side, remote into the person's machine, and then type it in, you could accidentally type that in, or you could be watching, there's all kinds of things that could happen. This really limits that from happening. Does anybody that's joining today, do you have any questions around those three things before we jump into storage control? I know it's a lot. All right. Know that, again, I always say it's an open discussion. Everybody's kind of quiet. I know we're throwing a lot at you today, but I felt like we had a lot of stuff to get through. So Jerome, let's keep rolling with storage control, and then
Sure.
we'll kind of circle back.
Yeah, I think this will be a lot more exciting of a conversation on storage control. One of the things that I can really say and tell you with regards to storage control is really the ability of ThreatLocker to actually catalog everything that's happening. So let me give you one example really quick inside of what you can do in ThreatLocker. And many people here on this call could probably relate to this. A lot of times, right, you got an end user. The end user is like, hey, I'm done working here. I'm going to leave this company. And of course, the first thing that they do is like, but I'm going to this other organization. And I think I can use some of the templates that I've learned from this company that I'm working for. And of course, data exfiltration is a huge issue. There's a lot of data inside of there. There's a lot of proprietary documents. There's a lot of proprietary information that really end users shouldn't be sharing. But the very first thing that they typically try to do, right, is to make copies of documents, take them home on their USB drives. But inside of ThreatLocker, what we can do is essentially take a look at everything that a user has touched over a period of time. We actually log everything for an entire 30 days. So prior to even this individual giving their notice to the company, we can see, all right, they were going inside of documents. Were they making modifications to spreadsheets that they shouldn't be making modifications to? Were they deleting documents that they shouldn't be deleting? Because of course, maybe they're leaving on bad terms and they're saying like, hey, I want to inflict as much issues. So there's a lot of problems that we can run into in our personal environment really inflicted by internal users that for whatever reason, they're launching these attacks, and they might not be sophisticated, but since they are employees of our organization, their rights to do things inside of the environment are wide open to execute a lot of things. We don't want them being able to make changes to things like access maybe to folders, like in this situation, right? I'm also navigating inside of this public directory. If I wanted to make a modification maybe to this Word document, if I tried to do that, let's say write a bunch of zeros to it just to cause havoc in the environment, you'll notice that ThreatLocker is preventing those types of attacks. Because what it really is doing is it's saying, hey, end user, the only thing that you're allowed to use inside of this directory are actually these Microsoft tools. If I opened it up with Excel, PowerPoint, and Word, I won't have any problems. But if I were to go in there and use like a WinZip or some other tool like a PowerShell to write over a number of my files, ThreatLocker will stop that, prevent them from essentially zipping it up, preventing them from maybe encrypting it, password protecting it, things that would essentially make our life a little bit more difficult. And let me add a little bit more to that attack. What they would typically do, right? They'll realize, oh, they probably have backups in the environment. So let's go after the backups. Let me get access to this backup environment. Whoops. Inside of ThreatLocker, we're able to prevent what they can and can't access to, right? Users cannot get to our backup directories to essentially really delete either our backups or encrypt them. And the reason for that is we have policies set in place that the only thing that is allowed to essentially gain access to that backup directory is the actual backup application itself. Nothing else. Nobody can browse in there. Nobody can open it up with some other random application because, again, right, a file is a file. I can run any type of encryption tool against any file and encrypt it, not even knowing what application or what file that is. But in this case, we can lock things down, preventing our data, and furthermore, even in this case, our backup directory from not being useful when we actually need it. If somebody were to plug in, let's say, a USB drive into my environment, what we would do on the ThreatLocker side is this. We would prevent them access, right? And then, of course, they can request access to it. And once we see that request, what we'll do, and which is a pretty cool feature here, is we'll catalog the actual serial number of the USB device that they plugged in. So with that serial number, I'll take it a step further and I'll say, well, maybe I will allow you read access or maybe read only or write access to that specific device, right? I'll maybe enforce some rules. Maybe only a specific user can actually use that device. Maybe somebody is in marketing. And of course, I'm like, well, since you're in marketing and what's on your USB drive, and you're going to tell me like, well, it's a lot of documents, Word documents, Excels, PowerPoints, and maybe even images. Well, why would I allow this individual to basically open a PowerShell script that could cause issues in the environment? I'll limit the type of files that you can actually open up. If you had regulatory requirements, Floyd talked about CMMC, I can enforce that in this situation and say like, hey, your devices, the only ones that you can plug in, have to be encrypted. If it's not encrypted, you cannot use this in this environment. So a lot of tools that we can certainly customize to really meet regulatory requirements, lock things down, and really minimize the ability to call out to different applications.
Right, and I'll echo that a lot of this, the complexity level gets reduced when, and I know that Jerome's showing a lot here, and there's a lot of levers and switches for sure, but the ability to manage it through an application, a third-party application, it really minimizes how difficult that is to put it in place inside of your environment. We've got a lot of these things could potentially be controlled through group policies and things through our directory. But what we are finding is that in a lot of environments, people aren't always on the domain when they're interacting with things that are part of your network, right? We've got folks that are working from home and they're remoting in, and then you got folks that are just not part of the domain, or maybe the domain server actually goes away. So what happens is we now have a tool that allows us to enforce several of these functions that wouldn't normally be part of just the end user's application. So again, increasing or decreasing rather the likelihood that someone is going to be able to compromise your network environment and essentially keep you safe from those threat actors, whether it's phishing or ransomware or what have you. So
Well, that's all I had, Floyd.
fantastic. Well, I will, oh, I need you to unshare and then I will reshare.
There you go.
Fantastic. Let's see if I can pick the right one. There we go. Can you guys see that big zero trust in action screen again?
Yep.
Outstanding. All right. So Jerome, thank you very much for going into that. And folks, I know it's a lot that we're putting at you here today. So ultimately what I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of is that, you know, and I called it a free demo. Let's be honest. I mean, if you call me up, I'm not going to charge you to do a demo. It's like, you know, everybody knows I love talking about technology. I've been doing it for decades now. So, but just to remind you, it's my advice is always free. It's when we actually like start doing stuff that it's not so much. But anyway, the Threat Locker folks have been super gracious as far as allowing us to go into different environments and really talk and do more of a deeper dive into what it looks like to put zero trust into action in these environments. So ultimately, if this is something that you want to dig into more and you want to talk through, reach back out to me and I will set it up to where we can take a deeper look at what this is inside of your environment, and then talk about, okay, what does this look like to put it into action, and is it something that you know, that you want to take advantage of. So at this point, I really, that's what we had to share with you all today. I want to open up the floor, and everybody's been super quiet. Is there any questions at all about this, or any discussions that we want to have about cybersecurity in general, or you know, what's gonna go on with the weather tomorrow? I'd say I'm open. Anybody got anything at all that they want to talk through?
I have a question. Does it work on phones?
The security side of it do not work on phones, not at the moment, but there is the ability to do approvals and things like that end users that might want to use via a mobile app that is in beta right now, and it's going to be coming very soon.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Kate. April. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Okay. Well, I think everybody knows how to get a hold of me if you want to talk through some more stuff. I really appreciate everybody taking some time out of their day. And I think we're right at that hour right now. So a little longer than we normally like to go. But again, I feel like this is a really important thing to talk through. So again, Jerome, thank you for joining. Cindy, thank you for helping me put all this together. Big help all over the place. And again, thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, please reach back out. And otherwise, we're going to sign off and let everybody get back to their Tuesday afternoon.